Another week, another flurry of headlines in former President Trump's legal cases. Currently, he is involved in 4 criminal cases and 2 civil cases. Will any of those derail his turbocharged presidential campaign that appears to have him headed for the nomination?
Now, this is Talking Points on CBS News Minnesota.
Good evening and welcome to Talking Points. Tonight we'll examine the question of how much legal and financial trouble is Donald Trump really in. This week, the Supreme Court hears arguments in a case that could kick Trump off the ballot in Colorado and other states as well. Also this week, an appeals court ruled unanimously Trump is not immune from being prosecuted for actions he took while he was president. Now, that just gives a big green light to criminal cases against him, including the January 6th case, the Georgia election case, the classified documents case, and the Stormy Daniels hush money case. Then there are the civil cases, with already a $5 million and an $83 million civil award against him in the E. Jean Carroll case. How much of a financial squeeze could he be feeling? In a separate civil case, prosecutors are asking for more than $300 million in damages for alleged business fraud by the former president and his sons. Trump says all of these cases are witch hunts and politically motivated, and his supporters are with him. A recent poll found 66% of Republicans believe these cases are being handled unfairly. 70% of Democrats believe just the opposite, that they are being handled fairly. We'll hear from a Trump supporter who is an attorney. But first tonight, let's hear from constitutional law professor David Schultz. Joining us right now, constitutional law professor David Schultz of Hamline University. Thank you so much, Professor Schultz, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Esme.
All right. The Supreme Court hears arguments that could bar Donald Trump from being on the ballot in Colorado and in other states, essentially wiping out his presidential campaign. Your thoughts about what the Supreme Court is going to do?
Well, what the Supreme Court, I think, is likely to do is to decide not to decide. And what I mean by that, they're going to try to find a way, I think, to eventually decide this case without ever actually ruling on issues such as, did he commit insurrection or anything? I don't think the Roberts Court really wants to get involved in this case. And so what I think is likely to happen is that the Supreme Court is going to look for some kind of way to overturn the lower court decision and get the courts out of this matter. The most likely, I think, is what they're going to say. I think what the Supreme Court is going to say is that before the insurrection clause can be used, there has to be what's called enabling legislation or legislation by Congress regarding how it applies.
Bottom line, you don't think the court is going to kick him off the ballot?
I think it's pretty unlikely. I think the court has learned a lesson from 24 years ago in Bush v. Gore not to get involved in deciding presidential elections. And if they were to say here that Colorado can throw Donald Trump off the ballot, it's going to come back up in Minnesota, Maine, and across the country. I think at the end they're going to say the people get to decide, not the courts, but they're going to find a different way to say that.
Okay. An appeals court decides that Donald Trump does not have immunity for actions that he took as president. This is specifically a ruling that has to do with the January 6th case where he's accused of trying to overturn the 2020 election. Is that ruling a broader ruling than that?
No, it's a pretty broad ruling at this point because one of the most interesting statements the court makes in its opinion on page 31 is to say the public interest in addressing possible criminality, including among an ex-president, outweighs any types of claims of immunity. And the court really goes through and refutes every argument that Donald Trump makes and says that, no, we can't give him absolute immunity. No, that the failed impeachment doesn't preclude them bringing criminal charges. And at the end, it says, the court, that in the interest of democracy, it really comes back to a very simple statement. No person is above the law. It doesn't say that exactly, but that's really what the court is saying, is that Trump has the same rights as anybody else, but no more rights than anybody else.
And is that just for federal cases, or does that include state cases?
That's going to include absolutely everything at this point, because Trump's argument was to say, I have blanket immunity for any actions I committed while I was president of the United States. And had the Court of Appeals ruled in his favor, potentially, I think that would have also impacted the case being brought in Georgia, and potentially even the case being brought in New York, which is all about business fraud, and that trial's still
And
waiting to
just, all right, let
start
me
too.
ask you this then. You talked about the Roberts Court deciding the case of him, whether or not he stays on the ballot. What about the Roberts Court? Because everybody thinks that this particular issue, whether or not he is immune from being prosecuted for things he did as president, that's going to end up before the Supreme Court. Where did they go there? Three of these justices were appointed by Donald Trump.
Correct. I think Trump wants to appeal it there, but it's no guarantee that the Supreme Court will take the case. Four justices have to agree to hear the case, and it's not clear if he has them. And again, I think the Supreme Court may want to try to avoid this. What's so unusual about this, appeal this case up until you get a final verdict. What I think the Supreme Court may do here is to say, okay, send the case back to district court, let them do what they want to do. Let the court do what they're supposed to do. If Trump is found innocent, then there is no need to appeal. If he's found guilty, then we may have this discussion. So it's not a foregone conclusion that the Supreme Court is even going to take this case. And again, the Roberts Court may want to find a way of not having to deal with this issue.
How much trouble is he in legally, financially because of these cases? And have we ever been close to being here before?
Okay, first off, we've never been anywhere near this in American history. Granted that we had situations where Richard Nixon potentially faced criminal charges, but not in the scope that we have here. Remember, there are 91 criminal indictments, 4 pending criminal trials, plus a host of civil ones. We just had Donald Trump lose in a case in which Gene Carroll was awarded nearly $90 million. We're awaiting another license to do business, and we want to fine him hundreds of millions of dollars. Trump is facing an incredible amount of civil and criminal problems at this point, and I don't see how he's going to easily get out of any of this in the short term or even longer term.
All right. Well, Professor David Schultz, as always, thank you so much. We really appreciate your time.
My pleasure, Esme. Thank you very much.
Up next, the views of attorney and Trump supporter Doug Wardlow. Joining us right now is attorney Doug Wardlow, who you may remember was a two-time attorney general candidate for the Republican Party. Doug, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Esme.
I know you certainly are obviously a conservative Republican. You have been openly a Trump supporter. Let me ask you about the ballot issue. Mr. Trump sees this as a vendetta against him, sees it as the Justice Department coming after him. What do you think about this ballot issue, and what do you think about Mr. Trump's arguments about it?
Well, I think, the ballot access case coming out of Colorado, the Supreme Court's going to hear oral arguments on Thursday, and I think that the justices are going to approach this the way that President Trump and any reasonable person is really approaching this, is that the folks in Colorado who brought this lawsuit are trying to exclude a candidate from the ballot. They're trying to take away a choice from the voters, and that's anti-democratic. And I think the justices will be skeptical of any position that's so fundamentally anti-democratic. And so that, I think, is the viewpoint they're going to come at this from. And Trump has a multiplicity of arguments, any one of which, if he wins on any of them, he wins the case. And there are many good ones, but one that stands out in particular to me is the fact that we just can't have any state court or state public official, who may have an axe to grind or who is a partisan, coming up with their own definition of what an insurrection is pursuant to Section 3 of the 14th Amendment in order to try to disqualify a candidate of the opposing party or someone that they don't like. If that was the case, we'd have complete bedlam, chaos. And you could have state officials who would make the case that Joe Biden should be disqualified under the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment because he has allowed over 10 million illegal immigrants to cross the southern border, and that could constitute insurrection, allowing Mexican cartels operational control of the southern border. Is that an insurrection? Should we exclude President Biden from the ballot because of that? We can't have individual states and state public officials who are partisans making those kind of determinations for disqualification. It just doesn't make any sense. And I think the Supreme Court is going to see that, and they're going to oppose that kind of anti-democratic push, and also just the chaos that would cause.
The former president has said repeatedly that he feels all of these cases, the civil cases, the criminal cases against him, are politically motivated. We just had a ruling saying that he is not immune, that in other words, criminal cases in the January 6th criminal case alleging that he tried to overturn the election can go forward. Do you see this as a Trump supporter as something that is politically motivated by the Justice Department?
I think it's absolutely politically motivated. If you look at the multiplicity of cases against President Trump, all of them are using very novel and unique, unprecedented interpretations of the law, the various laws that they're based on, like the RICO statute down in Georgia, the statute for federal statute forbidding fraud against the federal government in the DC case led by Special Counsel Jack Smith. And I think that's where the ruling in the Ninth Circuit just came down, saying that President Trump's presidential immunity defense does not apply. Of course, President Trump can appeal that to the United States Supreme Court. And I think they probably will, because that's a pretty solid argument. But be that as it may, it doesn't change the fact that these cases are politically motivated. I mean, just look at Fannie Willis's prosecution down in Georgia. There you have a situation where now a whistleblower has come out and has said that perhaps Fannie Willis has used federal funds, maybe $14.6 million in federal funds from Biden's Justice Department in order to possibly finance the prosecution of President Trump. And she met with officials at the Biden White House not long before the prosecution began and not long before she got those federal funds. So this is looking very fishy. I think that these cases are political, and the fact that the interpretations of the law are so unprecedented really points to the fact that they are political. And it's very dangerous to use the law as a political weapon like that. And I think the American people will see through that, and they're going to punish Democrats at the polls because of it.
In terms of Trump has been able to portray himself as a victim, and it looks like most people, most Trump supporters, see him as a victim. Do you think do you see him as a victim of this?
Well, certainly he's a victim of politicization and weaponization of the law, right? Of this concept of lawfare, using the law for non-legal means, non-legal ends rather, using it instead as a political cudgel. And when you see just the number of cases that have been brought against Trump, 4 different prosecutions in 4 different places, state and federal, under these novel interpretations of the law that don't really make any sense. The only reasonable conclusion is that, yeah, this is politically motivated, and therefore Trump is a victim of this. I think not just a victim, Trump is becoming a symbol for opposing the politicization of the law and standing up for the Constitution and liberty and freedom and the rule of law itself. And as he becomes that symbol, that's really generating a lot of support. You can't vote against a symbol who's standing up against tyranny, right? That's kind of one of the things I think that is propelling him so far ahead in the primaries, and he's going to be the nominee because he is a victim of political weaponization of the law. And he's a symbol of opposing basically the destruction of the American Republic.
Okay. Well, you actually just answered the next question I was going to ask you is how much does that contribute to his fervent support amongst his supporters? Doug Wardlow, thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Esme.
Up next, how much money trouble is Donald Trump in? An attorney breaks down what Trump has to pay right now with those civil judgments against him. Well, joining us right now is criminal defense attorney Joe Tamburino. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me on.
And of course, you also do civil cases, and that's what we want to get to. How much legal trouble, how much monetary trouble is Donald Trump really in? What happens when you get a big or any kind of civil dollar judgment against you and you're going to appeal? What happens? Do you have to put up the money?
Yes, you do. You have to put up the money in one or two ways. Let's take Mr. Trump's example. He lost the trial. He owes $83 million, $65 million of which are for punitive damages. So he has to either put in the court's escrow account, $83 million, and then appeal, or he could go to a surety company, a bondsman, just like in criminal cases, post a bond for the $83 million. That would require approximately 10% down. So you'd have to give the company $8.3 million, and then he could.
In cash?
Yes.
In cash.
That's
okay,
right.
And would you have to put up collateral for the rest, $8.3 million in cash and some kind of collateral for the rest of the, 52 million or whatever it is, 53 million?
That's correct. All surety companies require you to have some type of collateral. Most of the time it's property, like when we see in criminal cases, when someone posts a bail for say $50,000 and they put $5,000 down to a bonding company, they have some type of collateral, usually the equity in a home, for the remaining $45,000.
All right, and let's go back to the escrow the court escrow account. Is that something that every court has? I mean, because certainly most judgments are smaller than that, but does every court have that? Is that the way it works for everyone, not just former presidents?
That's correct. So even in, say, Hennepin County here, if you wanted to appeal a verdict against you that was for $10 million, then you have $10 million and you could put it in the escrow account and pursue your appeal.
All right. I know you're not a tax attorney, but one question I think people have is how can donations be used for monetary expenses related to legal fees? I mean, Donald Trump has apparently paid $50 million in legal fees from campaign donations.
That's a great question. It seems like Mr. Trump is using what's called a leadership PAC to get contributions and then pay his legal fees. And from what many campaign finance experts are saying, that appears to be legal. However, the question that remains unanswered is, would Mr. Trump be taxed on that? Because think of it this way. If somebody paid for the remainder of the year your mortgage, that's a taxable event. You're getting money to pay for your mortgage. So that has not been clarified. Would all of these millions of dollars that he's receiving to pay his legal bills be a taxable event?
Okay. It's hard to keep track of all of these legal issues and serious problems that the former president has. The appeals court has decided that he is not immune from criminal prosecution in the January 6th case, trying to overturn the results of the 2020 election. That's not final, is it?
Well, he's going to appeal it to the Supreme Court, but this was totally expected. Most constitutional experts that what I've read and that I have experience with never thought that he would win on this immunity claim. Immunity is very specific for a president or any office holder. So this is not surprising that the Court of Appeals 3-judge panel ruled against him. He'll take it up with the Supreme Court, and obviously we'll see what they say.
The former president has really dismissed all of these legal issues, both criminal and civil, claiming that they are a vendetta against him by the Justice Department and his political enemies. From your perspective as a defense attorney, both in civil and criminal cases, I mean, how much trouble is he in?
Quite a bit, because he's not only got the criminal cases, but he's got these civil cases. And from now till who knows the rest of the year, he seems to be very tied up in all of this litigation. The case to really watch is the classified documents case in May. That's in the Southern District of Florida, the Mar-a-Lago case. That's the one to really watch. That's the one with the classified documents where there's a recording of him supposedly telling some woman that, hey, I shouldn't be showing you these documents. That's the one that probably has the most teeth. The other ones, it looks like some are going to be continued. Obviously, there's intermediate appeals that are happening with them.
All right, and just quickly, in your experience, how long can a white-collar criminal case drag on? How long can these civil cases drag on?
Literally years, they could. Because look what's going to happen with the January 6th case. That's in litigation. We're going to have a Supreme Court argument, I believe, this Thursday on the issue as to whether or not the 14th Amendment Clause 3 applies in the case. So the litigation could be quite extensive. So literally, it could be years.
Wow. All right. Joe Tamburino, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that does it for this edition of Talking Points. As always, please send me comments or suggestions at esme@wcco.com. The show airs every Wednesday and Thursday at 6:30 and 9:30 p.m. On Friday nights, the show posts to YouTube for on-demand viewing. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Esme Murphy, WCCO News.